Good to have you back on Newsday. Analysts say African nations that align with Russia risk losing vital aid and long-term partnership with Western countries, which could have severe economic and political consequences. According to nations by forming alliances with Russia, these countries may be seen as undermining Western interest and values, potentially leading to reduced economic support and diplomatic isolation. Russia's growing influence in Africa is largely driven by its strategic interests, including expanding its military footprint, securing natural resources, and gaining political allies. However, this comes with significant risk for African nations, as Russia's involvement is often tied to authoritarian regimes and undermines democratic institutions. African affairs analyst Biodun Sowunmi and RISE analyst Dr. Amadi joins us now to share their perspectives on how African nations risk losing aid and long-term partnership by aligning with Russia. Good to have you on Newsday, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Very good, Dr. Amadi over there in Abuja. I'm going to start with Mr. Sowunmi. What do you think are the key economic sectors in Africa nations that are most vulnerable to a reduction in Western aid due to alliances with Russia?
To start with, we've seen how foreign aid has been deployed over the years in sub-Saharan Africa. And more specifically, it's been used as an instrument to promote foreign interest of donor countries. And we've also seen how it's being used to support economics. It comes in different forms, either in terms of soft loans, with reduced interest rate, or heavy loans, or foreign aid. And these are used to promote national interest of the donor countries. And in relation specifically to what has happened in Sahel Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, we can see the clear implication that we have seen France withdrawing aids. We've seen the EU also suspending aids. And of course, we know the Americans are pulling plugs on their aid. So given that situation, they need to worry about where the funds will come to support their own economy. In the first instance, Niger Republic, for instance, has been heavily dependent on foreign aid, to boost its budget and keep the economy afloat, despite the fact that it had huge mineral deposit in uranium. But we've also learned that in the course of so many years, France has also been engaging in sharp practices. And what I mean by that is ensuring that Niger is paid not the appropriate international price for uranium. And then France has the first right of offer. Not only that, the Niger Republic foreign reserves is kept in the bank in Paris, being controlled by the French government with limited access, by Niger Republic. And if they are loaning money through the foreign aid, it's still their same money that will be loaned to Niger Republic, through the bank in France. So therefore, we still don't know how heavily this will impact on Niger Republic. It will probably take another year when we see how the resources coming, the revenue coming in from uranium export, and how taking control of their foreign reserves would boost funds, being used to finance the budget. Whether that will happen, whether Russia, which has already stepped in to assist militarily, whether they will be willing to commit more funds into Niger Republic, we still don't know. Because what we know, which is clear, is that a lot of grains are being released by Russia to Niger Republic, Mali, and Burkina Faso. So, but notwithstanding that, Niger could have gotten all this without having to break relationship, with Western countries. But you can understand the frustrations when aid becomes a burden, when many countries are saddled, with debts. In some cases, the debts have gone up by over 500%, while they are implementing structural adjustment programs dictated by IMF and World Bank. And then you now have this culture of dependence, dependency on foreign aid. Whereas corruption is also a major problem, which the foreign aid is not tackling. but rather promoting a culture of dependency.
Yeah, thank you. But let me bring Dr. Sam Amadi on now. Of course, we know that this is creating more dependency. And of course, Russia is using this as more of a form of dependency rather than using it as partnership. And so he just mentioned the fact that some countries like the European Union have withdrawn, their support or partnership with Russia. Do you see Africa doing the same? And what do you see as the impact of this partnership or this alliance with Russia? What impact do you see it having on our relationship, that's Africa, our relationship with the West?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's clear that Africa has not been strategic and maybe not too awareness level among African leaders about the changing geopolitics is very low. During the Cold War era, we had most African countries like Nigeria fell under the non-allied group. And that means that we kind of wisely thought that getting trapped in the East-West conflict wouldn't be good for national development. And African countries focus more on developing their economies, building Pan-African partnership, and like Nigeria, we made it our foreign policy initiative to be Afrocentric. But the world has changed, and today, clearly, an alliance with Russia that is not calibrated and well managed could draw backlash from the West. We see two opposed concepts of the world. The American-centered, Europe-American-focused world order is one that does not want Russia to be part of any either bipolar or multipolar world. So if we move towards Russia as we are doing in some part of Africa, we are going to get a backlash. And the first backlash would be a sense in which maybe aids that are strategic, not multilateral, bilateral, would be less to those countries. And again, what the West will do is to isolate. There are going to be those countries that are less embedded with Russia, and they will single them out and give them support. And then those who are deeply involved with Russia would suffer the fate. The second thing that is going to happen is cultural. Even although we talk about the Western hypocrisy in terms of development, democracy promotion, and the fact that there's a negative, unintended and intended consequence of aids and democracy promotion. But the truth is that the West's commitment in terms of value to open society, to democracy, even if in a shallow, confusing form, is contrast with the Russian model. And so we're going to see a cultural orientation among African leaders, or in fact, a justification for those who are trending towards authoritarianism. And now that we've seen military rule, resurfacing in Africa, especially in the West African coast, I think it would be bad for governance, it would be bad for civil society and all the buoyancy that drives entrepreneurship in the private sector that goes with that. So that's one of the, consequences of getting too close to Russia. And again, we're going to find ourselves becoming the whipping boy, because Russia's focus in Africa is not to make Africa a global power. It's also to use us to wage, and get back on the West. So we might become the sacrificial lamb, as the case might be. We lose the West, but we're not getting to Russia that will not help us. And let's not forget that Russia, is part of being, trying to assert itself in this area, is in a way a declining economic and moral power. It's still strong in GDP in terms of primary produce and oil and agro. But if you look at high tech, if you look at the staying power in terms of companies and economic growth, I think Russia is struggling. And so getting allied to Russia in a way that causes the West to first move away from us and then undermine us through many strategic UN, World Bank, IMF, and several other platforms will be a disaster for Africa. So I think that in engaging Russia, the focus should be to assert ourselves as independent, to assert ourselves as interested in economic engagement, and not to be caught up in Russia's political build-up, to assert itself as against the West. I think if we're that strategic, we still retain our relationship with the West, but again, engaging Russia to be a partner at that level. Again, it's important that Russia is at the lower level of service sector. So Russia is actually where we're competing with. If you look at low manufacturing, the ones that are not high-tech enough, Russia is a country that we ought to compete against to provide those services in terms of agriculture, in terms of oil and gas. So we see Russia as a partner we can find a way to eat into their market, to displace them strategically in terms of produce. So if Russia and the West fall out, Africa can step in to provide those services in a competitive manner that Russia could have provided to the West. Example, energy resources, agriculture, and all that. So I think it's a matter of how strategic we are and understanding the changing landscape of global politics. That Russia isn't that overwhelming strong power anymore. China, maybe more than Russia, could play that role in the future, but Russia is struggling to contain the West and reassert itself and create some geopolitical influence. And so Africa shouldn't, journey with Russia in that sense of fighting the West, because there will be no much defense for us when the West hit back at us.
Very good, Dr. Amadi. Mr. Sowunmi, if I may go back to insight historically, if you remember during World War II, under the Vichy French forces, under German occupation, France then, were losing territories, to Japan and other Axis forces, as it were. Now, to a large extent after the war, it also led to independence movements, which led to other African nations gaining their independence, as it were. But coming back to the issue of influence of Russia in West Africa, if they don't do well, we're seeing how they're struggling with Ukraine to make headway on this conflict. How does that align with the relationship with West African countries? How do they view them, as being the all-powerful country they're trying to project themselves? And if you remember, not too long ago in Mali, they've been struggling with rebel movements in the north, whereby even Wagner forces were actually killed to some large extent in ambushes. So all of these forces, when you look at it, how is it telling on Russia's role, or, as it were?
Yeah, the issues are two. One is military,
yes.
The other is economic. On the military front, what is happening in Ukraine, which is quite clear to the whole world, is NATO and America versus Russia. But Ukraine is the theater, the field of war, sadly. Yeah. And the whole of NATO's weapons are being used. The funds in billions, hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into that war, being funded by NATO. And then we have Russia resisting. So for me, militarily, Russia...
Mr. Sho, I'm so sorry to have to interject, but I will come back to you on that. We have some breaking news now. Hezbollah has confirmed the death of its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, following an Israeli airstrike not too long ago. It also pledged to keep fighting its battle against Israel. It stated that, quote, "The leadership of Hezbollah pledges to the highest, holiest, and most precious martyr in our path full of sacrifices, the martyrs to continue its jihad in confronting the enemy, supporting Gaza and Palestine, and defending Lebanon and its steadfast and honorable people." We will keep you updated on more details as they continue to flow in regarding that story. And we also still have Mr. Sowunmi. You were talking about the issue. Yeah.
So for me, Russia is appearing, to be able to withstand all the NATO assaults, including fronts against it. The economy has not collapsed. Russia seems to be very close to achieving its own strategic goal in Ukraine, particularly in Luhansk and Donetsk Republic. I mean, it's just a matter of 1 or 2 months from all my readings. Now, when you look at Mali, the case of Mali is different. France was in Mali for how long? They could not solve this same problem. And then under the French intervention, we had coups and all that taking place. Now, the Russian Prigozhin-led forces move into the place, which they now call Africa Corps. We've seen they've also suffered some casualties, yet the problem has not been resolved. Contrast that with what happened in Central African Republic when Jotodea was in power. The Russians came in and helped stabilize that country, and that is why Central African Republic is holding on to them. So it's a mixed fortune when you look at it from military viewpoint. Then many African countries are not constrained by the Western nations concerned about human rights, the conditions for sale of weapons. Russia would sell weapons to you if you need them. And that's on the military front. On the economic front, again, you have to look at what has been the impact of the foreign aid in Africa. Do we really need it? Because the bottom line at the end of the day is that these aids have never transformed any country. These aids are usually given to poor countries with conditions. For instance, structural adjustment policy. We've seen what happened in Zimbabwe, how it destroyed Zambia. We are also implementing some form of adjustment policies in Nigeria. Now, let's take, for instance, the case of Ghana. In 2001, we've seen what happened to Ghana when they implemented the structural adjustment policy. It went so bad that investment in education dropped to the extent that it is only one child in 400 children that could have access to secondary education because of the increased cost of education in Ghana. Take the example on corruption. Take South Sudan, for instance. If you remember in 2008, the Dura saga scandal, happened. There was famine in southern Sudan. And the whole world, the Western countries wanted to avert, the famine. So they gave $1 million, to Sudan. What happened to South Sudan? What happened to the money? The contract was awarded to fake companies. The $1 million disappeared into companies, fake companies related to the president, with nothing achieved. Again, when you look at between 2006 and 2012, South Sudan, again, with aid money inclusive, spent $1.7 billion on constructing 74 kilometers of road. 74 kilometers of road. And the contracts were awarded, to cronies, the elites. So what you see is, rather than reducing the poverty in South Sudan, it has also increased poverty. The contrast, if you take it, is in the case of Burundi and Uganda. When Burundi was under aid denial, we realized that the tax revenue went up. Between 1996 and 1998, the tax revenue went up because without foreign aid, they were able to look inwards and then, collect the appropriate taxes, and the revenue went up significantly by more than 15%. Again, in the case of, in the case of Uganda, when Uganda was at war between 1991 and 1996, there was no aid given to Uganda because of the conflict. The tax revenue went up astronomically to the extent that not that Uganda was able to fund the war, more funds were now available even after the war.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Sowunmi. But I'd like to come to Dr. Sam Amadi, especially on this breaking news coming saying that Hezbollah has confirmed the death of its leader, and of course that fallout of the war between Israel and that particular region. Talk to us about, or rather that militant group, talk to us about what you think the impact of this will be on the ongoing war.
Well, it depends on what happens, what the U.S. also does and the Western powers. First, as at yesterday, the issue was whether the U.S. was, taken along, carried along in this strike. And initially, there were signals or statements to the fact that the White House, Washington, was not carried along. But later, we learned that maybe a few minutes to the strike, Israel did. Now, the voices in the U.S. and in the West is two issues. One is Israel claims the right to defend itself. But other people say, look, if the U.S. does not support what Israel is doing, then it shouldn't be supplying the resources for that. The question now is, what will Hezbollah do? What will happen to the conflict in the region? The unwritten expectation is that they don't want escalation. But I think the killing of the leader of Hezbollah is read as crossing the red line. The question then is, would this snowball now into an all-out war in the region, especially dragging in Hezbollah, the forces, and of course Hamas, all involved. But to what extent would this generate into real or escalate the fight in the Middle East? Two things to bear in mind here is, it looks like the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has been weak a little bit with Western powers. Everybody is basically not supporting him. We saw the UN, he made a speech to an empty hall. But he's bullish on determining to go after those he considers to be the enemies of his country and those who are part of that attack in Israel. Second is that even with struggling domestically and struggling to get approval from world leaders, there seems to be a tacit, I think, understanding that Israel will not be hindered in pursuit, even though world leaders speak openly about a ceasefire. Washington is putting together a plan and still, as of yesterday, insisting that that plan will go ahead for a ceasefire. But nevertheless, I think there seems to be static support to Israel to continue these strikes. And if that continues, the question then is, at what point will some of the more moderate Mid-Eastern countries, Saudi, Kuwait, Qatar, and others, now maybe take a more diplomatic reverse of their position and be more frontal in engaging Israel? Will Turkey be drawn into this? What happens in Lebanon in terms of... So are we going to see all-out war? But it seems to me that this particular strike could define the moment, and we might see escalation. But the question then is, will it be a deterrence or will it be a provocation? The idea of massive force is that it could deter. And I mean, if Israel is hitting everybody from cell phones to pager and now smashing the headquarters of Hezbollah, would that be a deterrence, or for the time being at least, or will it be a provocation to more out war? So we wait, but this is actually the red line. If there was a red line in managing the conflict between Israel, Hezbollah, and Hamas, this strike is read generally as some kind of crossing the red line. But for me, whether we're going to see immediate response in the form of escalation would depend on whether this massive, overwhelming force is a deterrence. If it's a deterrence, it then has a chilling effect for a moment before rebuilding. If it's a provocation, we might see a retaliation in a matter of days. So it depends on which side of whether it's a deterrence or a provocation.
Very good, Dr. Amadi. I would like your thoughts on this as well, Mr. Sowunmi. You know, the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel was mainly restricted to the border regions. The escalation, caught everyone by surprise, coming from Hezbollah, launching unprovoked attack into the heart of Israel, as it were. But do you think Hezbollah more or less beat on more than it could chew here? And do you think, coming from Mr. Netanyahu's speech at the UN, that any form of diplomacy can be achieved at this moment at the, regarding the conflict?
No, I don't really think anything can be achieved currently. This is very significant escalation, and don't forget, this is not the first time. We saw what happened with the Hamas leader that was, killed in Iran, in Tehran, which again the whole world had to prevail on Iran not to retaliate at that point in time. Otherwise, it would lead to war. The world is already suffering from the high price of a barrel of crude oil and so many consequences of the Ukraine-Russia war. So nobody wanted an escalation. Already we've seen how countries like Germany, Italy, are being affected, and France, through the right of right-wing elements in those countries. So, and it's of course having negative effects in Africa too. Now, what you can't afford is for Hezbollah, who is a very formidable force, to actually go into all-out war with Israel. What is accounting for what is going on now is that I think Israel is taking advantage of the fact that they've managed to disrupt Hezbollah communication through the pager bombing. And then because they now know where some of their leaders are, and it won't be easy for them to move around without establishing new communication. So they are taking advantage of that. I think the Biden administration would not want an escalation of this. They want to prevent a wider war. Otherwise, the recession will come in so fast, leading to elections in United States and Europe, and that is what nobody wants. We don't want a global slowdown. Already there is a slowdown, in China, and nobody wants that. So I think they will try and manage this behind the scene. The key is with Iran, whether Iran will now say, Iran and Turkey, whether eventually they will now say, this is enough. we've got to do something about this, no matter the consequences for the whole world. We don't know.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed and see how that pans out at the end of the day. But we must appreciate you. Thank you so much for the analysis. African Affairs Analyst Biodun Sowunmi. Thank you so much. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank
also,
you for having me.
Dr. Sam Amadi, Arise News Analyst. Thank you so much